Imagine living in the most magnificent palace in the world, the Palace of Versailles. It sounds like a dream, right? Surrounded by gold, glamour, and endless gardens. But here's the catch. Life in Versailles wasn't just a fairy tale. It was governed by a set of incredibly strict and sometimes downright bizarre rules. If you were lucky or unlucky enough to live there, you had to follow them to the letter. Let us pull back the velvet curtain and discover the shocking rules of life at the court of the Sun King. First things first, let's talk about space, or rather the lack of it. Versailles was huge, with over 700 rooms, but it was also incredibly crowded. At its peak, up to 10,000 people lived and worked within its walls, from the royal family down to the humblest servants. Most courtiers lived in tiny, cramped apartments, often just a single room with no fireplace, no private bathroom, and certainly no view of the famous gardens. These were called apartments. It was a huge status symbol just to have one, no matter how small. People would scheme and plot for years to get an apartment at Versailles because proximity to the king was everything. Even a small, cold room was better than being away from the center of power. Now, let's get to the king himself. Louis XIV wasn't just the king. He was the sun, and everyone else orbited around him. His entire day, from the moment he woke up to the moment he went to sleep, was a public spectacle. These were called the lever and the couture, the rising and the going to bed ceremonies. Only the highest-ranking nobles were allowed to attend. And within that group, there was a strict hierarchy. Who got to hand the king his shirt? Who was allowed to watch him eat breakfast? These weren't just random chores. They were coveted honors that showed your rank and favor with the king. Missing one of these ceremonies was social suicide. You had to be there, day in and day out, just to be seen. And getting the king's attention was a full-time job. You couldn't just walk up and talk to him. Oh no, you had to follow a strict etiquette. For instance, you couldn't knock on a door at Versailles. Knocking was for commoners. Instead, you had to gently scratch the door with the little finger of your left hand. People would even grow their pinky nail long for this specific purpose. Can you imagine walking around scratching at doors all day? And when you were in the king's presence, you couldn't turn your back on him. Ever. You had to back out of the room, bowing repeatedly. It was a workout just to leave a conversation. Let's talk fashion. At Versailles, your clothes were your resume. They screamed your wealth, your status, and your sense of style. The dress code was incredibly strict and expensive. Men wore elaborate silk coats, breeches, and stockings, often adorned with lace and jewels. Wigs were a must, big, powdered, and expensive. Women's fashion was even more extreme. They wore massive dresses called robes à la Francaise, with wide panniers or hoops that could make it difficult to even walk through a doorway. Hairstyles became towering works of art, sometimes several feet high, decorated with feathers, ribbons, and even miniature models of ships or gardens. The pressure to keep up was immense. Many noble families bankrupted themselves, just trying to afford the latest court fashions. The king wanted it this way. If his nobles were spending all their money on clothes, they had less to spend on raising armies against him. Now for the less glamorous side of things. Hygiene. We have to talk about it. Versailles was famously beautiful, but it was also famously smelly. With thousands of people and very few bathrooms, and the ones that existed were often rudimentary, you can imagine the problem. People would relieve themselves in corridors, behind curtains, or in the gardens. Chamber pots were everywhere, and it was the servants' job to empty them, but it was a never-ending task. Personal hygiene wasn't what it is today either. Bathing was infrequent, as it was often considered unhealthy. Instead, people would douse themselves in heavy perfumes to mask body odor. They would also use powder on their faces and wigs. So Versailles was a potent mix of expensive perfume, sweat, and, well, other human smells. It was the price you paid for living in the lap of luxury. Even eating was a performance. The king often ate his meals in public, a ritual known as the grand couvert. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of courtiers would stand and watch him eat. It was considered a great honor just to be in the room. And you couldn't just eat whenever you were hungry. Meal times were set, and the food was incredibly elaborate. We're talking dozens of courses, with dishes shaped into incredible sculptures. But this the funny part. By the time the food traveled from the distant kitchens to the king's table, it was often cold. And if you were a lower-ranking courtier, you might get the leftovers, or nothing at all. Many nobles kept secret stashes of food in their tiny apartments just to get by. Let's not forget about communication. There was no privacy. Gossip was the currency of Versailles. Everyone was watching everyone else. Who was in favor with the king? Who was having a secret affair? Who wore the same dress twice? Servants were often spies, and a single misspoken word could ruin your reputation and get you exiled from court. You had to be constantly on your guard, smiling and making polite conversation while secretly trying to gather information and protect your own secrets. It was a psychological battlefield dressed in silk and powdered wigs. Even your gestures were policed. How you bowed, how you curtsied, how you held your fan, everything was a coded message about your rank and breeding. For example, a duke had the right to sit on a certain type of stool in the queen's presence, while a lesser noble would have to stand. These privileges were fiercely guarded. One of the biggest scandals of the court was the affair of the stools, where a duchess fought for her right to a specific seat. It sounds ridiculous to us, but at Versailles, a stool wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of your entire family's honor and place in the world. So, while life at Versailles looked like a dream from the outside, the reality was a high-pressure, competitive, and often uncomfortable existence. It was a golden cage. You had the privilege of being near the king, but you sacrificed your privacy, your fortune, and your freedom. Every moment of your life was dictated by a complex and unforgiving set of rules. It makes you wonder, was it all worth it? What do you think? Would you have survived the strict etiquette of the Palace of Versailles? Let me know in the comments below. It's a fascinating look into a world so different from our own. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this glimpse into history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. See you next time.